The reason can be found 150 kilometres to the south. Manaus is a large modern city in the heart of the rainforest. A city whose population has grown from 600,000 to nearly 2 million in the space of 30 years. All modern cities need electricity, so the Balbina Dam was built to meet the needs of Manaus. But demand was increasing rapidly, and it was built in a hurry with insufficient research. It's not surprising that it's not been a success. Planned to generate 250 megawatts of electricity a day, it actually produces less than half that, 112 megawatts. There are many problems. The catchment area from which the water is collected is too small, and the vast reservoir is too shallow. A third of it is less than 4 meters deep. These trees are growing in the middle of the lake. There are environmental problems too. Decaying vegetation produced a lot of methane gas and has made the water so acidic that it corrodes the turbines. Because Balbina can't work to its planned capacity, Manaus still has to rely on oil-fired power stations for much of its electricity. And the oil is imported, as are most things for the city, along the Amazon River. The river is why Manaus is located where it is. Manaus stands at the place where two major rivers of the Amazon system meet, at the confluence of the Solimões and the Negro rivers. This is the focus for all the rivers of the eastern basin. The meeting of the two rivers is an incredible sight. The Solimões River is heavy with sediments which give it a creamy colour. The Rio Negro, by comparison, carries little sediment. It is known as a black water river. The flow of the two rivers is so strong at the point where they meet that the waters stay separate. Because of its location, Manaus grew up as a port. Ocean-going ships can reach Manaus, although it's more than 1,000 kilometres from the sea. Wharfs line the riverbanks, and the port bustles with activity. In a region with few roads and no railways, Manaus is the transport centre. Cargoes are offloaded out of smaller boats to be sent along the river system. And it is the smaller boats which bring the produce of the region into the port. Some of it to be consumed by the people living in the city, and the rest to provide return cargoes for the big ships as they head back down the river to sea. Most of the produce is food, traded in the waterfront markets. The fish market is the largest of these. The Amazon has a greater range of freshwater fish than any other river, and a good selection of them are available freshly caught in the daily fish market. The best are sold to restaurants and hotels in the city. But Manaus is also a major passenger port. The rivers are the motorways of the basin, carrying goods and people everywhere. River buses carry passengers to and from villages upstream and downstream of the city. It is commuter traffic, perhaps a little different to the kind found in other cities around the world, but it's still commuter traffic. Behind the port is a city easily recognisable to anyone who has seen a modern city. From the air, the city centre is clearly visible. High-rise buildings dominate the skyline, the office blocks of the central business district. People come here to work, to shop, and for leisure. The streets are jammed with cars. The people cram onto buses. It's the same all over the world. Around the centre, the city stretches to the horizon. A mixture of industrial sites, the heavy industries strung along the river, and residential areas, poor areas in the inner city, and great wealth further out. Jobs and houses dominate the city of Manaus. Since 1967, the population of the city has grown rapidly. People moving into the city from villages in the forest, from cities on the coast, all seeking work. The city has grown to accommodate them. This is a new housing development for families on low income. It is built on the edge of the city, on land which was once used to grow food crops for Manaus. Land which was exhausted and abandoned. Unfortunately, last year only 500 of these houses were built in a city where the population is increasing by more than 30,000 a year. The result? Most incomers find homes in places like this, makeshift houses built from packing cases and polystyrene from nearby industrial estates. Manaus is ringed by settlements like this, homes with no running water, electricity or sewers. In time, those people may manage to find a home here. Again, houses built without permission, on creeks off the river, with only the most basic of services.
I'd really like to move out of here, but we can't afford to. There's a lot of pollution here from the floodwater. In the rainy season, there are lots of rats and mosquitoes. They give us diseases. Diseases of the skin and fevers, particularly for the children. There's also a bad smell because the sewer system doesn't work, and there's a lot of garbage. It's a bad place to live.
Lindemar has lived here for 15 years, but it is merely the latest stop for her family on a journey which started 50 years ago and 2,000 kilometres away on the coast. Her grandparents left Recife to take up land in the forest. The government was giving it away. But the land was poor, the farm failed, and eventually they headed for the city of Manaus, hoping to find work. No one knows exactly how many people live like this in Manaus, probably over 1 million. It's sobering to think that this is better than the life they have left. But it has one big advantage, and that's why many people want to live here. It's near the city centre, and that's where work is. Lindemar's family depends on this work, and they are lucky. Fredo works as a shoeshine boy in the city centre. Mari cleans windscreens at the petrol station. And Lindemar's husband works in the fish market. Brazilians love parties. This one is a festival of Brazilian culture, celebrating the vitality of the city of Manaus. It's a free party, open to everyone, whether from the shanty towns or the suburbs. But celebrating the success of the city might be premature. In the same way that these dances have little to do with true Indian culture, Manaus, the city in the forest, has little to do with the forest, and that could be its problem in the future. The port throngs with small boats apparently carrying produce into the city from the surrounding forest. But in fact, the area of Amazonia produces only 10% of the food that's consumed in the city. The land around Manaus is not very productive. Most of the farmed areas around Manaus are now abandoned, the soil worked out and no longer able to produce crops. And where the forest is intact, there are no roads or rivers, so the problems of transporting produce into the city are too great. So most food has to be imported into Manaus. It comes in various ways, by air from the farming regions in the south of Brazil, along the Amazon River system, or by road, though roads in Brazil are a trial. Dodging massive potholes is a regular hazard for lorry drivers because the roads are difficult to maintain in the heat, and long stretches are closed during the rainy season. It's one reason why Manaus only has one major road connecting it to the rest of the country. The Pan-Amazonian Highway runs from Boa Vista in the north to Porto Velho in the south. Even then, trucks loaded with goods from the south have to be ferried across the river, all adding to the times and costs of transport. Food comes in along these routes, and so do the materials that keep the industries of Manaus turning. For in the middle of the greatest forest on earth, with huge reserves of timber, surrounded by valuable and in many cases untapped mineral resources, what do you think the factories of the city do? They assemble television sets, videos and washing machines, using parts imported from Japan, the United States and Europe. Why? The answer is that the same government which gave land to Lindemar's family also decided to develop an industrial base on the Amazonian frontier, and Manaus was the location chosen. In 1957, the city was declared a free trade area. Duties were removed from all imported goods shipped into Manaus. The result was a boom in consumer spending, people flooding in from all over Brazil to buy cheap TVs, cookers and washing machines. Soon after, the Brazilian government also removed trade barriers to bringing in the parts to make those things. So Manaus became the electrical assembly line capital of the country. This time, big international companies rushed in to join the boom. It brought much-needed jobs and prosperity to Manaus. 20 years on, Manaus has all the trappings of a modern city, including shopping malls to rival any European city. And this has brought with it a boom in service industries of all kinds. This girl works in a high-class clothes shop, and her wages are comparable with those in Britain. She gets paid £600 a month. But this 14-year-old boy, working a back-aching 6 days a week on the waterfront, is lucky if he takes home £10 a month. And there is little state help for poor families. Most young people in Manaus divide their day between school and a job. In Brazil, schools are arranged to enable that. School sessions last for 5 hours, morning, afternoon or evening. Most modern cities depend on service industries, but Manaus faces a serious problem. Employment in manufacturing industry is now falling as government aid has been cut back. This, in turn, affects the service industries. Manaus could soon be facing a jobs crisis. The difficulty is how to create long-term jobs in a location like Manaus. Remember, it's halfway up the Amazon in one of the most remote areas on Earth. Fernando Collier is a journalist in the city.
Temos aos milhares. Esse desenvolvimento.
We need to develop industries whose raw material is here in the Amazon. Fruit, wood, fishing, the food industry, grain production. Development with our products from this region. This is real development for the future. Any other industry, for instance the electronics industry, can change plans and shut down its factory in Manaus and move to Singapore, Taiwan or Sao Paulo. But not the industry which uses local raw materials. It will stay here.
So making use of the forest could be the way forward. And there's more than one way to exploit the rainforest. Great hopes are pinned on this, ecotourism. These people are paying £100 a night to stay in a jungle lodge in the rainforest. They can get close to some of the rarest animals in the world. They can thrill to the night sounds of the forest and the river. They can go alligator hunting.
It's a female. Alright. Now, this is the species we have most in Amazon. This species can go to a length of 3 meters. Here is young.
How old do you think?
8-9 months. Might be a year.
Eu pego a copa.
They can sample life in a caboclo settlement and buy souvenirs. More and more places are springing up around Manaus, offering what they call rainforest experiences. But tourism alone cannot save Manaus. It's in a curious position, a city without a region, a service centre with no population to serve except those living within the city. The future of Manaus may depend upon a change in attitudes towards the rainforest and the development of new ways of exploiting it. A fire in the Amazon rainforest, and yet another area is being cleared. For the farmers, burning produces ash, which provides nutrients for their crops. For the ranchers and loggers, it's a quick way of getting rid of the unwanted rubbish of trees. In a rainforest of 8 million hectares, a single clearing like this is not particularly important. But fires like this can be seen all over the Amazon basin. Under each plume of smoke, an area of forest is disappearing, in some cases forever. Viewed from space, the picture is more alarming. There are fires everywhere. On one day in 1993, 36,000 separate fires were counted in the Amazon basin. It's caused much concern. Environmental pressure groups have mounted campaigns against deforestation. Yet the Brazilian government is not worried. Their official statement says,
"The image of the Amazon rainforest being cut down, burnt and neglected by the Brazilian government is a long way from reality."
They point to the record of the rest of the world. 2/3 of the original forest in North America has already been felled. Europe has cut down 3/4 of its ancient forest. By comparison, the Amazon rainforest is still relatively intact.
Most of the Amazon rainforest is still there, which is a very important fact. But it also doesn't mean that there's nothing to worry about, although sometimes it's presented that way. As of 1991, which is the last year for which we have Landsat satellite data, 10.5% of what was originally forest was no longer there. So almost 90% was still there. But most of what had disappeared in just the last couple of decades. So the processes are very fast, and of course the causes of that deforestation are still in place.
But isn't this just a Brazilian problem? Why should we be concerned in Europe, or anywhere else for that matter? The answer is that the changes taking place in Brazil could affect the rest of the world, through the climate and in particular through the build-up of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Plants, like all life on Earth, are based on the element carbon. Burn vegetation in the presence of oxygen, and one of the products is the gas carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is one of the main greenhouse gases. Here's what happens. Energy from the sun reaches the Earth. Some is reflected back into space. The rest warms the Earth and its atmosphere. At the same time, the Earth gives off energy, mainly as infrared radiation. Some of this passes into space, but some is trapped in the atmosphere, mainly by carbon dioxide. Increase the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, more energy is trapped and the Earth becomes warmer. This is the greenhouse effect. And there's another problem. The forest itself is like a vast chemical factory, powered by energy from the sun, driving the process of photosynthesis. Water and nutrients are taken up by the roots of the trees and carried up to the canopy. In the leaves, complex reactions take place. As part of these reactions, carbon dioxide is taken from the atmosphere and oxygen is given out. So trees actually help to maintain the balance of gases in the atmosphere. And the rainforest is the main storehouse of carbon on Earth. Cut down the trees and the carbon will be released, much of it in the form of carbon dioxide. The greenhouse effect is leading to global warming, a gradual increase in temperatures on Earth. That is why the world's industrial countries are worried. Rising global temperatures could lead to melting ice sheets, rising sea levels, and worldwide flooding. But Brazil is a big country with a population of 160 million and growing at a rate of 6% a year. Amazonia can provide land for these people and food and raw materials for industries. The products of the forest, particularly timber and minerals, can be sold to earn hard currencies, which can be used to pay off Brazil's overseas debts. Brazil borrowed heavily to fund development projects like the Balbina Dam near Manaus. It has the largest overseas debt of any country in the world, and the interest payments are now more than $5 billion a year. That's $15 million a day. It sounds bad, but Brazil has one of the largest economies in the world, and it's growing rapidly. Brazil can meet its debts if it develops its resources. So why should Brazil take any notice of countries in the world who have exploited their own resources to the full, including clearing their own forests? After all, the burning of the rainforest puts into the atmosphere less carbon dioxide than is found in car emissions, and nobody's suggesting banning cars. There are in fact good reasons for the Brazilian government to rethink the exploitation of the forest and ask themselves two questions. How will Brazil be affected by environmental change? And is Brazil gaining the best return from the exploitation of the forest? In fact, Brazil may face its own environmental problems long before global warming takes effect. Carbon dioxide is not the only thing held in the rainforest. It's one of the wettest places on Earth. Almost every day it rains, and much of that water is held within the forest. Sometimes you can see it in the form of vapour. It is held as though in a giant sponge. Humidity in the forest is very high. Most of the water goes back up into the atmosphere. Less than a quarter escapes into the soil and rivers. Remove the trees, though, and all this water will have to go somewhere. So what will happen? The Amazon basin will become drier, and without forest, the land surface will become hotter. This will trigger storms that are more intense than at present. With no canopy to intercept the rain, this will happen. Soil erosion. The rainfall will wash away the soils and they will end up in the rivers. This could eventually change the Amazon itself. It's perhaps difficult to imagine silt clogging up this mighty river. At this point, it's so wide that you can't see the opposite shore. Yet this huge expanse of water is only one of the tributaries of the Amazon, and it is nearly 2,000 kilometres away from the Atlantic Ocean. It's easier to understand here on the northern rim of the Amazon basin. These are the mountains of Roraima. Here the rivers are near their source. They are cutting back into the mountains and they are carrying large amounts of silt. Increase the amount of silt going into these, or any river, and the river may change. It has already happened near these mine workings. Runoff from the cleared land and from the mine workings has washed soil into the neighbouring river, changing it completely. It is happening in parts of the Amazon already. If soil erosion increases, it could affect the main river itself. The result could be prolonged and widespread flooding. It's a big dilemma for Brazil. The rainforest has to be developed to provide wealth for Brazil and livelihoods for its people. But development appears to be destroying the forest. So what can be done? Is the answer simply to stop development and preserve the forest?
I think the first thing is that you have to take a positive approach to Amazonian development. You have to recognize the fact that the American West was developed in the 19th century. It was an unstoppable process. Amazonian development is an unstoppable process. The question is, what future for the Amazon? And I think the main question is, the main response I would give is that what do we want? We want perhaps not to maintain and preserve the existing ecosystems, but that whatever landscape emerges in the future is one that is productive, and the Brazilian people that live in that landscape have a reasonable quality of life, and that the productive potential of those landscapes and the resources that are contained in them are available in the long term. And to that, to me, is sustainable development, not just the preservation of forest.
Some say present development is not sustainable. It will leave virtually nothing for the children of the people who live in Amazonia. The question is, how can it be made sustainable? That's the difficult question. Well, some ways are being tried. These are researchers from the Amazon Institute for People and the Environment, and they are looking at new approaches to logging. On this trial plot, they are mapping and measuring all the trees and identifying those which are of commercial value. Then they decide how the trees should be felled and plot routes along which they can be dragged out of the forest. The aim is to reduce damage caused by selective logging.
We're not saying that managing the forest in this way will stop the forest being damaged, but it will minimize the impact and help the forest to regenerate. The way things have always been done, the forest would disappear in 90 to 100 years' time, but it can have a much longer life if managed properly.
Good in the long term, but even simple management techniques take time and cost money. And anyway, much of the logging in the Amazon forest is carried out illegally. The people who break the law won't follow rules for forest management. At present, logging is not a major cause of forest clearance, but that could be about to change.
There won't be commercial volumes of timber coming from Southeast Asia within a few years. And where else are big international companies from Japan and so forth going to look except the Amazon? There are already Asian companies showing up here and major inroads in Guyana and Suriname and other nearby places from Asian timber companies. And you can expect then large multinational pressure on timber here, which hasn't happened yet.
There are many questions asked about whether land in Amazonia is being used effectively. We've already seen that most of the rainforest clearance has been for farming, 2/3 for cattle ranching, 1/3 for small farming. But cattle ranching is inefficient. On this ranch, 20,000 hectares of land feeds fewer than 1 cow per hectare. It is not surprising that Amazonia can't even produce enough beef to feed its own people. Small farmers attracted to Amazonia in the 1970s by offers of free land also have to struggle with poor soil and low yields. They need help from the government to guarantee a price for their product and with the supply of fertilizers so that they can practice effective crop rotation. But there could be another way. Remember Manuel, the rubber tapper? He works 60 hectares of forest and makes a modest living without felling a single tree. He depends upon the richness of the natural rainforest and upon the variety of life within it. As well as the rubber trees which he taps, he also harvests natural oils and resins from his trees. And he collects crops like these Brazil nuts. His work is seasonal, so his earnings vary, but the productivity of his 60 hectares of forest is almost twice that of a caboclo farm after its first 2 years, and 6 times that of a similar area of the Dallas cattle ranch. Crucially, his activities do not damage the forest. He runs his land as an extractive reserve, and the government is now encouraging land use like this. This is another industry which depends upon the richness and diversity of the forest. Tourists are of growing importance to Brazil's economy, and they come to the Amazon to share the rainforest experience. These ants have a fearsome bite.
It gives you fever, headaches, and heart palpitations. Wow. If about 3 of them or 4 of them bite you, you have a weak heart. There's every possibility you'd have a permanent conversation with St. Peter the Pearly Gates.
The Amazon rainforest is one of the wonders of the natural world. It holds an incredible variety of life. But that diversity is harmed when the rainforest is cleared. One estimate puts the number of species lost every year through the rainforest clearance at 27,000. But with so much of the rainforest left, remember, 90% of it is untouched. Does it matter? It might if this ever happens to you, if you have to undergo major surgery. If you do, you'll probably have to receive an injection of D-turbocurarin to relax your muscles. What has this got to do with the rainforest? Well, the drug was isolated from curare, which is an extract from a rainforest liana and is used by the Indians as a deadly poison. Here's another example, the steroid cortisone that you might need for sports injuries. That originally came from the rainforest. There's a long list of rainforest plants and animals that have formed the basis of beneficial products. What other medicines could be discovered there? We may never find out if clearance continues at present rates. The Indians of the Amazon rainforest have taught us a great deal in the past about the secrets of the forest, particularly with drugs and remedies that they use in their own forms of medicine. Perhaps there are still a lot of things that we can learn from them, but the Indians are under threat too. When the Portuguese explorers arrived in the 16th century, there were more than 5 million indigenous people in the region. That number is now down to around 200,000. 80 distinct indigenous cultures have disappeared since the beginning of this century. They're driven off their lands by developers and speculators. There have been many killings. The ones left are fighting for survival, including the Chikuna.
There have been many changes for the Chikuna because of contact with white people. Some have been good. We now have schools so that we can learn to read, so our people can improve and be equal to others. But there are bad things too. We're losing our own language and our customs. White man's church came and killed our real religion. This part of change makes my heart heavy for my people. I would like the people of the world to help us, to persuade the government of Brazil to let us keep our lands, to let us live in the forest as we always have.